fear of the unknown. Perhaps in our current understanding of Lovecraftian horror, no other concept could be as strongly associated with it as what Lovecraft himself described as the oldest and strongest kind of fear. But when considering Lovecraftianism not merely as a set of themes, tendencies and outlooks reflected in the works of the original author of the genre, but as an entire movement that has been kept alive by the many Lovecraftians who continuously expand, alter, and reiterate its formula, it is still quite possible to come across hints of a somewhat consistent tendency regarding the choice of themes. A form of favoritism on the part of these Lovecraftians when it comes to choosing exactly what kind of unknown is worthy of being depicted as fearsome. In fact, I'd go as far as saying that for these authors, and also for Lovecraft himself, it is not merely the unknown that elicits the strongest sense of fear, but in fact, no unknown could be even remotely as fearsome as what is essentially unknowable. Now, when it comes to encountering the unknown, it is safe to assume that we as human subjects have a wide variety of means to respond to it, which of course includes fear, but is not limited to it. The objectifying process of the scientific method has always served to reduce extremely unique phenomena into systems of universal signifiers and formulae that can be quantified, recognized, and reproduced. And whenever the scientific method fails us, we never shy away from establishing arbitrary systems that still manage to allow us to fit the unknown in relation to a world that is supposedly known, albeit through some leaps of faith, educated guesses, or carefully crafted metaphorical relationships that still allow us to mistake them for literal ones. In fact, as far as a conscious doctrine of knowing goes, one could argue that these makeshift techniques were invented much earlier than the scientific method itself. Either way, it is by no means difficult for us to convince ourselves that we know what we truly don't. In the worst case scenario, we can always fall back to clinging onto relatively older stereotypes that are by no means less arbitrary than whatever we invent today, but their age itself, through a metaphorical maneuver, could grant them the credibility we demand from them. All that is left is the ability to use the same metaphorical maneuvers to project the known onto the entirety of the unknown, or rather to reduce the unknown so that it may fit our pre-existing knowledge. Although thankfully it seems that at least some of us do have the guilty conscience that grants us the capability to reflect upon and acknowledge this whole process. As one of the people who I suspect of attempting to invent multi-purpose hammers has once said, quote, "It is tempting, if the only tool you have is a hammer, to treat everything as if it were a nail." So if we take into account our cunningly convenient, almost genius ways of smuggling the unknown into the known, even at the cost of self-deception and self-sabotage, the true weight of the Lovecraftian author's task becomes evident. The only way to inflict fear of the unknown is to trap the audience in an encounter with not merely what is unknown, but specifically that which is immune to all of our theatrics, that which upon encountering it, we cannot by any means fool ourselves into thinking that we know it, or that we have any chance of ever knowing it. Our fear of the unknown is most pronounced when we have no way of escaping the unknown. Now, I would argue, to identify such an unfathomable reality, the Lovecraftian takes on a grimly Kantian outlook. To orchestrate a conception of that which is impossible to know, there comes a need for not only establishing what it means to know, but more specifically, for the sake of allowing oneself the opportunity to not be able to know something, a need for establishing the limits of human cognition itself. But a limit in itself cannot necessarily impose a sense of horror, but that which is undeniably out of our reach may at best merely impose a sense of hopelessness. Although in the case of the Kantian noumenon, it let the idealists of the next generation conclude that it is entirely irrelevant to their lives. Although it is in fact undeniable that hopelessness is essential to the Lovecraftian experience, it is merely one of the symptoms of a much more fundamental disposition, one that does not only concern the existence of an out-of-reach reality regarding an objective world of objects, but one that implies the world of other subjects to be equally out of reach. Imagine the following. you stand before a female praying mantis, eye to eye, undeniably being observed, brought into her world, and being seen as a certain something. However, what you do not know is the shape of the mask that you are wearing. Is it that of a female or a male praying mantis? Are you being seen as an object of desire and possibly emergency food, or just another instance of your observer? It is this question that Jacques Lacan considers to be the foundation of the experience of anxiety, not as an effect, but as a disposition towards the other. And the same question is considered to be at the heart of the psychoanalytic discourse. The neurotic analysant always asks the analyst, "What is it that you desire? What am I to you?" Of course, not in a literal sense, but it is in fact a refusal of answering it that both grants the analyst a special place in the world of the analysant, perhaps that of an eldritch abomination or a female praying mantis instead of just another one, and also guarantees the continuation of analysis. However, regarding the Lovecraftian experience, I'd add yet another question. Are you even wearing a mask? Are you even being seen? With these two questions in our disposal, we finally discover the fundamental condition that both arouses us in terror and breaks us in despair. And what is truly captivating about the Lovecraftian experience is that you can never comfortably remain in one or the other state. Within the Lovecraftian experience, one is neither given the privilege to enjoy the stability brought by the pessimism of living in a soulless, careless, unpredictable and unknowable mechanical world of objects, nor the opportunity to indulge in a Hegelian battle for recognition against another praying mantis with all the anxiety it brings. You can neither reduce the world into that of mere objects, nor when facing the other subject you can ask, "What am I to you?" The true terror of encountering an eldritch being does not only arise from an incapability or difficulty in discovering the desire of that being and the demand it poses towards us, which would put us in a state of anxiety instead of terror, but it is in fact the very possibility of a lack of any desire or demand involving us on the part of the other. Still, we're also denied a stability found in despair, for the Lovecraftian experience does not merely imply a total lack of any form of discourse or any sense of desire or subjectivity on the part of the world and the other, but a refusal. The eldritch beings are conscious, they observe, they desire, and they are capable of both relating to the world and acknowledging the relations that other subjects have towards them and towards the world. The battle for recognition and the intersubjective push and pull of desire is present, perhaps among the eldritch beings themselves, but the terror arises from the fact that we humans are entirely excluded from it. We're not merely mourning for the idea that there is no intentionality behind the world, or that we are separated from it in such a way that we cannot discover it. We are in terror, for that we know for certain that the world has no intention of even acknowledging our existence, even though it is perfectly capable of doing so. We are neither merely mourning for the absence of the other, or trembling in the anxiety of not knowing what the other wants to do with us, but in fact, both the anxiety and the despair, the terror, comes from the fact that the other has nothing to do with us as fellow subjects. The eldritch being has to be incredibly kind to assume a sense of desire and subjectivity on our part, but for the most part, the Lovecraftian horror is a horror of being reduced to an object. It's not that the eldritch beings exist in a universe separate from us, for we are always under the influence of their whims, but what is horrifying is not only the fact that we cannot resist their influence, but that we cannot even voice our discontentment. When facing an eldritch god, we see ourselves as having been already eaten by the praying mantis, truly devoured by it, dissolved within it, and already an extension of it. What constitutes our subjectivity is otherness, is the structuralism granted to us when we divide the world into mutually exclusive parts that can be considered to have relations to each other exactly because they are separate beings. It's a separation from the other, and an acknowledgement of separate desires articulated through separate voices that allows us to be subjects with our own desire articulated through our own voice. The eldritch god does not acknowledge our voice, and thus our existence as desiring subjects. Through objectification, we become mere extensions of the will of the cosmic world, and this, with the help of Lacanian metapsychology, easily explains the madness that follows. Encountering an eldritch being does not merely cause a mental breakdown, but a breakdown of thought, language, cognition, and subjectivity. The eldritch god throws us into a state akin to psychosis through imposing a regression to the pre-Oedipal state, a state within which we were never castrated, never separated from the other, and as such, we never recognized our existence as a separate being. The radiance of the eldritch god melts us back into a primordial soup where we exist as organisms devoid of a voice. As we dissolve into the world, so does the difference that constitutes both the structure of speech and that of cognition, and with it falls apart what Lacan called the symbolic order, where a subject of speech and desire is originated. Our senses and our cognition provide us with both an image of the eldritch god and an intuition of its existence. From among Lacan's three registers that could be considered the dimensions that constitute human existence, the eldritch exists both within the real and the imaginary, but as unfathomable as it is, through refusing to take a position within the symbolic, that is to assume a relationship with the subject and to make itself known within a discourse, the eldritch god undermines the entirety of the symbolic order, which not only undermines subjectivity, but leads to what is considered the very definition of psychosis, a disentanglement of the three dimensions. Looking back at our premises, we realize that encountering that which leaves us no means of convincing ourselves that we know it, or that we have any chance of ever knowing it, is indeed a direct encounter with the real without being able to signify it and give it a place within the symbolic. But in such encounters with the eldritch beings depicted in Lovecraftian works, taking refuge in the imaginary is also out of question, for the image that the eldritch being presents to us is so undeniably alien that it rules out any possibility of knowing it through identifying with it, that is, through projecting our pre-existing assumptions onto it. Indeed, our fear of the unknown is most pronounced when we have no way of escaping the unknown, which within the Lovecraftian framework is achieved through trapping us within the real. Incapable of clinging onto the imaginary or the symbolic, we are left face to face with an unknowable reality that refuses to represent or to be represented within our world of known representations, ultimately dissolving this world alongside the place we have assumed for ourselves within it, only leaving us with an image of the eldritch other devouring it whole. In the end, even though the audience never truly encounters such creatures, and even though their world and their place within it is left intact, this imaginary fantasy of being devoured is enough to throw us into the depths of anxiety. Still, the metapsychological assumptions behind Lovecraftianism leave us with a problem regarding Lacanian theory, that for Lacan, it was impossible for a neurotic to become a psychotic. Should we take the Lovecraftian outlook as an indication that it is indeed not impossible, or that what we call a trauma is just a glimpse of psychosis, experienced by the neurotic subject as it fears being devoured by the other? Either way, I'm out of time.